Good afternoon, everyone. So today here we have three very eminent, at the same time, very young filmmakers with us. Their films have traveled all around the world, and they have received a lot of acclamations, both in India and abroad. Um, we have Sarvnik Kaur here, and then Shirley Abraham, and um, uh, Shaunak Sen. So um, I will start with a very general question. Um, I watched one film each of all of you, and uh, this one thought that came to my mind while watching documentary films is that uh, very earlier in my career as a filmmaker, I used to feel that uh, fiction films are more about looking into yourself, and non-fiction are about looking outside the world. But for the past a few years, I've had this difference in that thought also. I feel that non-fiction is also about looking at a part of yourself. So, how would you how would you relate with the topics of your film and the form of your film? Like, yeah, we can start with Sarvnik, and so how much are you connected with the theme of your film?
When I started this film, which was about 6 years ago, somebody at a workshop told me nobody wants to look at activist films anymore. And as harshly as I held on to that critique, there was something which I found resonated with me. And that primarily came from the realization of the fact that nobody has space for causes anymore. And I had to dig in deeper to be the storyteller and not represent any cause. The cause will find itself. Over the course of time, the process of this film was so hard for me on my heart and soul, but it was so enriching. It was so life affirming. In the process, I found love for myself, forgiveness for myself. So it became a process. I fell in love with the process. And what you see now, Lao Tzu is my guru. He's written this something called a treatise called Tao Te Ching, which was written 2,000 years ago. And something he said really resonated with me, and which was everyone's missing love in their life. When they see love, they recognize love. And I think that's what the process became for me, a process of pouring in everything that I had and not holding myself back in any way. I don't know how academically strong I am. I don't know how much I can talk about film grammar, but every moment of that film has come from the heart. And that's all I can say.
And that really shows in your film. It's very passionate, and your film starts with this quote, saying that if it's not political, it's just decorative. Uh, and do you still believe in that phrase, and do you still think that this everything, like, if it's not overtly political, it is just decorative? Is that can you interpret that it that way, or?
I'm a big fan of poetry.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to do with my films. And poetry is about aesthetics, but it's about the truth that the aesthetics kind of elevate and highlight and bring to life. Um, I think the reason I make films is because we've forgotten how to appreciate poetry. We've lost it in our lives. And every day of my this journey is trying to find it again over and over and over and over again in the process, in the making of it. So aesthetics is a part of it, but it's in the part of telling the truth in a way that also makes you want to sing and dance and laugh and fall in love with life all over again.
Okay, thank you. And over to you, Shirley. So how are you connected with the theme of the film? It was a very meta film. It was, it showed very. I think it was shot at a very crucial period in the history of cinema itself. The huge shift between the yeah, celluloid and digital, and that, and it was well edited, and it was, like, it was anthropological as well, because you could actually see the lives of all these people as well. So yeah, could you please tell about the process?
Thank you. Yeah, and indeed, your film is all heart. Absolutely love it. Um, so, um, so I came to filmmaking. I think just when I was like 3 or 4 years old, there used to be this one lone film that we could watch on Saturday evening, and I had to watch it like kind of undercover. Like I had to cover the television with a piece of cloth so that the light wouldn't escape and give me away, because my family was still is devout Protestant, and I was supposed to attend church next day, and obviously they wanted me to go to sleep, and there were all this these very mega Christian narratives about how God is going to judge you, and you're not on the right side of the angels, etc. And I was just like, oh, like here's little me, trying to find my place in the world. And I think I probably came to filmmaking from that moment, because they said you can't watch them, so maybe that's when I thought I'm going to make them someday. Look what I can do. Of course, like nobody told me that it's also non-linear agony that actually gets you through the process of filmmaking. But I think I always had that elemental fascination for watching films. And when I first came to the traveling cinemas, um, I studied filmmaking, and I'd studied that these cinemas, they had been consigned to the mythology of cinema, because they were a thing of the past. And even in the past, they had the traveling cinemas were just kind of numbers in the distribution game. The so-called C circuit, C and touring was like the last sort of grade of films. So I think what the cinemas helped me discover was that there are people who are still involved in running these cinemas that are the life breaths of communities. It was a lived experience. These cinemas came to people who could watch a film only once because they had no access to big screen cinemas all through the year. And so this was something that they would look forward to. This was like a festival and a celebration and a holiday, and of course also a religious space all in one. And I think it was an empirical curiosity. Like when Amit and I started, we wanted to just literally know everything. Like we just stood there and drank of the magic of traveling cinemas. And that led us on an 8-year journey and into what eventually became the Cinema Travelers. And I completely agree with this this moment of reckoning that you had about nonfiction being a way to look into ourselves. And the first time I read about this was in a piece by Arundhati Roy, and she talks about fiction as universe and nonfiction as argument. And I thought I completely disagreed with her, because it's kind of like a false dichotomy to imagine that fiction is a way to look inside ourselves, and nonfiction is just just argument or just exposition. In fact, yeah, she said fiction is universe and nonfiction is argument. And it's not quite a dichotomy that rings true with the work of what any of us have done, or any of what a lot of filmmakers are doing, and in India. And all of our films, when they are character driven, we are looking at people who have a certain moral complexity. We are looking at those challenges. Look at the opening film. The opening film that was screened at the festival, it had that intense moral complexity of whether one man will choose to forgive who is now the killer of his father, regardless of what the father has done or not done. And we actually are working in ways to understand ourselves, to find these pathways inside of one's soul. And I think the documentary form is just absolutely acquiring new and newer life and meanings in this process.
And I wanted to ask you another question, which is not that related to the first question. So, what happened to your characters in the film after the COVID or during the pandemic? I was very curious.
So I think the kind of defining shift in the life of the traveling cinemas, as we had seen them through the years that we were working with them, didn't even need COVID. because when the shift from celluloid to digital happened, and we can understand that technology can be a level playing field. So the patrons of the cinemas and the showmen, they had access to the same technology, and that's when, which is digital technology. So films were available now on cell phones and on other kinds of devices. So obviously that changes the field. Then that sense of patronage and also that sense of devotion to cinema, and also the monumentality of that big screen image is somewhere lost. So of course it remains, in the sense that there are always gateways to that and you can look into that. But they did need COVID. They had sort of folded up way back then.
Thank you. And Shaunak, what's your like? It's a very complex film, and again, no, other than the central theme, we could actually see the political situation in India, the struggles of the characters in other ways as well. So, what was your relationship to the theme and these characters, and how did you come across them?
Well, I don't really think about theme per se. I don't know if that's a good starting point. But before that, just going back to it, the question about the relationship of the inside and the world, and whether nonfiction is about the inside and fiction. I don't know if one can actually have these mutually exclusive binaries at all, really. Fiction is a lot of things, nonfiction is a lot of things. There's a lot of nonfiction that's tremendously cinematic and poetic, and and its beauty comes from that. And there's a lot of nonfiction that's political, and by which I mean frontally political, and there is and it's rewarding because of that. So it's almost impossible to put a finger on what, because there's no one sort of homeostatic thing called nonfiction per se. So, for instance, between the last film and this film, for me, in this film, I was certain that there could be no theme. I was interested. How the film began was essentially, anybody who's lived in Delhi in the winters recently is very familiar with this kind of a pervasive grayness. Every time you look up, it's this kind of a monochromatic gray expanse, and you have these tiny black dots gliding in the sky, which are the black kites. And that's like the dystopic picture postcard of the city. And for me, it sort of began with this. I was stuck in a traffic jam, and you look up at the same classic scene, and I got interested in this kind of a vague triangulation of air, birds, and humans. And other than that, philosophically, I was interested in thinking of human non-human relationships. But more than that, initially, a film sort of comes as a kind of a ineffable glow at the back of your head. It's more like a mood or a texture or a, it's like a sense that you feel. And not so much, like, at least to me, like for me at any rate, it's never so much a theme per se. It could be a kind of a vague conceptual thing, but it's also as much about tone. And especially in a doc, it's like a slow drip accumulation, right? You're spending 3 years. All of us have spent 3, 4, 5 years making the film, and so often it's just like it's a tiny vessel that's just getting dripped, and over time your own life becomes raw material or fodder for the film, and the film, and you're looking at the world through the delirium or the demon eyes of the film, right? Like everything, and it's in this kind of slightly perverse way, cross-pollination, that the film slowly accrues, right? It slowly accretes, and the best films are ones where there is this sense of density. There's a kind of lived, felt, fleshy, embodied density of everyday life. So it's impossible to hold on to really one, at least for me, like one per se theme, because over time, so many other things from the emotional, from the affective or the conceptual, like sort of keep dripping in, and then hopefully it becomes like one sort of glut of something. And then in the edit, essentially, it's like, it's as much about what you leave out as it is about what you keep. Like it's like sculpture in that sense, and then it becomes really a question of craft. So at no point is it ever actually per se about a kind of a theme in a sloganeering kind of a way ever for me.
Okay, so when you first started filming, didn't know what the film was going to be like, or how much of it did you know before?
Well, you have vague themes that you're interested in. Well, themes, vague things that you're interested in the sense that there are a couple of books that I was. So there's this book called The Peregrine by J.A. Baker, which is about a man sort of obsessed with this one peregrine falcon. And I was very interested in that kind of intensity of the relationship between this person and this one bird. And some other books like this. And we found this one family that works out of this tiny, claustrophobic, stifled basement. And over time, it felt like the fact that all of the city's birdfall is falling into this one tiny, derelict space seemed like it was pushing towards a metaphor, you know. Of course, you don't want a full metaphor because that always becomes a bit cardboardy. But in a sense, there was like more and more things that you sort of, and once you've deep dived and you're in that process of free fall, you're just clutching onto the straws of whatever new thing that you get. And here it felt like incrementally you were holding on to more straws, in the sense that there's the emotional relationship between the brothers, there's the political stuff, which is like the wallpaper of their lives, which sort of every now and then obliquely and tangentially makes itself visible. So it's present and it's palpable, but it's not really direct. And at the same time, the brothers themselves are like philosophers of the urban, right? They're very conceptually very clever. And of course, then there's the animals themselves. And then we sort of found a level where we realized this couldn't be a relationship between just two human beings or one family and the black kite, the bird, but had to expand it to a broader kind of a cross section of animals. So which is why the snail, the rats, the, you know, all of the animals that you see, so that you sort of zoom out and think about human, non-human entanglement in a broader way. But these are all things essentially that you discover and stumble upon as you go along. You know, unlike fiction, you don't have to have something bound in paper and then say this is what the film is on, right? You, as you're wading through it, you discover things. And anyway, like documentary is always like this embrace of the radical unscriptedness of the world, right? And the point is to sort of show up and keep sort of accumulating material. So I don't think it helps so much to have a kind of topic per se. It's better to have a kind of open disposition and keep filling up the hard drives, proverbially speaking, and like find it as you go on.
Yeah, there was a sense of invisible filmmaker there at certain places, because all these rats and even other animals, if they were really aware of your presence, they wouldn't actually show up, or they wouldn't behave that way, Phil. And how about the human characters? How much of your presence influenced their actions? What did you feel?
Well, I mean, quickly, I don't want to take up too much space, but with the animals, the thing is that they're deliciously disregardful of your designs. So it's what happens is that you can especially with animals, it's it could be absolutely brutal or very rewarding, in the sense that our experience was that none of us are trained in any kind of nature for a thing, which is good because we weren't bringing in any of those grammars. But you'd spend 10 days waiting for something, and suddenly on the 11th day, the perfect moment of the turtle, or a snail with fire behind it, or like a kite comes and takes somebody's glasses, and those are purely like accidents. But accidents are also a function of time, so you have to show up often, and then often it happens that the space rewards you with accidents and contingencies. With the humans, I suppose it's like a similar feeling. I imagine that a lot of us will have the same experience, that initially, at least for me, the first month is absolute trash in terms of material, because people are still getting used to it. And really, boredom is the main tool you have in your toolkit, in the sense that I think in the first month, you're almost working to bore the characters, insofar as your presence and the camera's presence is not an obtrusive kind. And over time, it's like the joke in our crew is that you have to wait for the first yawn, and when you had that first moment when characters are either yawning or abusing or some such, where you sort of, there's some degree of unself-consciousness that comes in. And anyway, the main ambition is this kind of where characters are being instead of behaving in front of the camera, right? And the main ambition is to find this kind of a everyday banal quotidianness of, gesturally that has to be it, and shoulders are loose, face muscles are, and that only, it's a kind of rites of passage that for me usually takes the first month of relentless shooting. The material is garbage because people are initially, but over time it happens, and then it's a ongoing process. What I got in the third year, for instance, I could never have gotten in the first year. So it's a slow kind of, and it's as much, it's like any dense friendship in life, right? It's like a uppy downy thing where you have to work hard. Sometimes they are sick of you, sometimes you're sick of them, and that's the process essentially.
Thank you. And how about you? About the presence of the filmmaker and your subjects, because sometimes you are really close to them and you are actually observing the people who are entering the cinema hall, or people are already watching the films. So, how much of your presence did you feel affected them?
Mm. Yeah, that is a great question, and I completely agree with Shaunak that the gold, so called, if there is a thing as documentary gold, it's all a gift of time. It's you take a chance upon the unknown, and since Plato, life has asked us to do this, and you just have this belief in the ways of the universe, that the world will unravel, that the world will unfold. Of course, not at a pace that you like, of course not in ways that you would always want. It's actually I mean, real life is drudgery, and then there is magic. Like, then there is something that tells you that, oh my god, okay, this is what I'm living for, or this is my aspiration, or here is this moment where this person is the one little gesture that you can get across the course of time. And again, it's really just about being, this whole thing of showing up and being present. It's just like, in the way that it pans out, it's absolutely boring and unrewarding on an everyday basis. Like, there is no magic to making a film, or at least not on most or many days. But then there are those times when you're with people who are sitting on the floor, and it's made of big stones, because actually this is a dried up river, and it's like a tent full of people who are just drinking in the magic of cinema in a dark tent. And that's when, that's really when what is called as communal dreaming starts to actually unfold before your eyes. And we really wanted to find some expression of that. And I think Amit is, he's a fabulous DOP. He just knows exactly what to go for. It's almost like, in the work relationship that we have, we are I mean, we're not even talking. It's almost like we just have this sense of knowing. And one always hopes for great documentary collaborators like that. And so that was just a way for us to understand what is, we saw the audience is very big on the screen. We saw them as opposed to the big cinematic image in the opening sequence of the Cinema Traveler. The cinematic image is kind of like seen through the projection booth, and it's there and it's not, and it's scratchy and it's moving. But the people there, the emotions. And what is cinema? I mean, it essentially is life, is emotion. I mean, every time we are cutting, Kosakovsky asks us to cut for the audience's emotion. So that is, the documentary goal that one is going for. So that is why those people are so big and mega on the screen, because that is the gateway to the monumentality of that image that they are seeing, is the people. So it was one of the, I feel like it's a prized moment for our work.
Thank you. And how about you, Sarvnik? You were working with performers, and so did they have a tendency to perform a little, perform a bit more in front of you, or how did you feel?
Between my first film and the second film, I think with the subject of your film ends up deciding the form. It organically just emerges from what you're doing. With my second film, in Kashmir, it was impossible to not be there. You had to be present. You were a mainlander with your camera. There's a power dynamic that exists by itself. And there was no reason for us to hide ourselves. With my second film, I didn't want to hide myself, but I realized in this particular scenario with Against the Tide, we have fingers pointing at the moon. And if they're looking at your finger, they're not looking at the moon. And that was something that I realized will come from my relationship with them. The relationship has to be so honest, where for me, actually, the camera was very incidental, because very early on, I realized that whatever's happening in the sea with the second film is also happening in the lives of these fishermen. And if I can just know where to place my camera, where exactly it is that the story is unfolding, because I could put a CCTV camera there and I'd still not have a film. But just to know that there's that connection, and then it was the collaboration, and then it was like with my DOP, it was like I could be absent from the room, because by then my relationship with my characters was such that they would just turn and start consulting me about everything. I was an everyday part of their lives. And so I had to be absent from the room most of the times. And I had to believe that I know the story. I know what's happening. I may not know the details of it. I may not know the semantics of it. And that I will go back. Life will distill itself. It will show me what's happening. I just need to be present there to record the moment. And I may not be able to record this moment. I'll record another one, and then the next one. So long as I have this privilege, have this window which is open for me to just witness. And then recording and documentation is very, very secondary. I mean, it will happen eventually. And that was the really why it took so long, but that was the way I was going about it.
How long did it take for you?
6 years.
6 years. And 8 years for you. Okay. Very interesting. So, yeah. So, I think we can get some questions from the audience now. Yeah. Do we have a mic?
Hi, my question is to Shaunak Sen in particular. So you have an academic background as well, or you also had an academic profession along with this filmmaking. But in your films, there's this non-preachy or not trying to be a didactic kind of way. So how has your film scholarship been significant to this kind of storytelling, or how has it been different?
Well, it both helps and doesn't help. It helps in the way that you have patience with ideas and concepts, and you have patience with thinking somewhat, right? So it helps in the first part when you're thinking of the idea and you think of different ways of approaching it. But then, so there it's your friend, but then afterwards, all the world of academics and, like theory, etc., becomes a bit of an enemy, because the thing that academics does or theory does is that it contains, frames, or closes, it kind of conceptualizes in a way where it has the hubris of feeling that it's understood something, right? Like, this is what it is. So it classifies and it taxonomizes, and that kind of restricts things. Whereas the main thing in the documentary form is to be open, right? Is to be open for all the curveballs and the thing that, because life is imploting action, and that somehow feels like it's the other end of things from what the academic mind allows. So it's definitely a negative for when you're shooting. So I tend to not read anything when I'm shooting. In the post, again, it becomes very helpful, because then again it's a question of editorializing, and then it's really a question of throwing things on a wall and seeing how it sticks and questions of structure, right? So in the beginning it's helpful. Through the 2 years it's absolutely useless, and then during the edit, again, like developing the muscle to read helps. But I don't know if the binary is between you said preachiness and being didactic. I don't know if, because that sort of presupposes that academics is that. My distaste for that kind of film comes from my cinephilia, not from academics, in the sense that, of course, so many documentaries that, especially in the environmental discourse, I started the film with a kind of healthy distaste for a lot of pedantic, moralistic, screechy docs that I think have done more disservice than any good. And the main thing is something that we've also been speaking about, which is that good politics doesn't necessarily make good art. And very often those get sort of conflated. One has to hit a kind of a sweet spot or a critical mass of both. So all of which is to say that my distaste for, or my hope to not make a didactic film has nothing to do with the academic end of things. It's just like, even as a film lover, I don't like those films at all.
Hello, I have a question for all three of you. As a young person myself, I've during and after the lockdown, I've gotten into many OTT platforms that have given rise in popularity of documentaries a lot. Example, I got interested into documentaries. I've watched some Netflix documentaries a lot, and I've binge watched all of them. And as you part of independent documentary cinema, what do you all have to say about the rise of in documentaries in OTT platforms?
I have no idea why I'm being handed two mics. I don't have a film on any OTT platform that is mine. I also don't watch a lot of those films on OTT platforms, but I hear you. So of course it is helping in, and one has to use words really advisedly, you know, because we say that, oh, it's helping films find a home. Is it? Is it really? You know, does it mean that once a film goes on an OTT platform, it actually has a life? Or is it the fact that, as other people are saying, films go there to die, you know, that it's a digital graveyard? I mean, the jury is out on that. Haha, I made a joke. But the thing is that I think you should, you know, one has to understand that it carries a certain power with it. Of course, it helps in, you know, let's say in the marketplace or at pitching platforms, that you have, you know, a film that you made for Netflix, etc. It really is about how you're looking at yourself as a filmmaker, you know. And if you were in Deepa Dhanraj's session yesterday, she was talking about how they used to take their film to the audiences. Of course, now we're not saying that, you know, that was multi-million, etc. But just look at that whole idea of making connections with an audiences and hence making films accessible. Of course, nothing can beat or match Netflix, but that was not even the aspiration. So the idea back then, especially, let's say, for people like, you know, the Yugantar Film Collective that Deepa was with, and, you know, the People Film Collective in Calcutta, Anand Patwardhan has been taking his films to the people, is essentially to connect with people, you know, find who are the people this film is going to speak to, and see if there is a relationship that can be developed with them that is not transactional, that is not, you know, like there is this whole idea of documentary being transactional and extractive, even in all kinds of relationships, like, you know, seeing people as subjects or seeing people as audiences, seeing people as distribution networks. And it's really like, you know, perhaps like a curse of the times that one is talking about, you know, humans in these terms. It's almost like maybe we can harness the powers of whatever all of these things represent, and then perhaps find our own position in that. Like, I'm not sure if I love or hate the rise of, you know, OTT platforms per se.
Well, it's you know, I keep getting asked now in the recent months about the golden moment in Indian documentary. There is nothing but a very complex answer to this. It's firstly, the thing is that I do think there is cause to be cautiously optimistic, but not be euphoric or celebratory at all. Firstly, the first point is that I think that question sort of invisibilizes previous documentary filmmakers, and all of us are standing on the shoulders of filmmakers that we've, you know, whose films we've seen and who've had, I think, significantly tougher distribution challenges. Having said that, clearly in the last 4 or 5 years, something seems to have shifted, at least in the festival climate and in the distribution climate. So, there's no denying that. Now, the thing is that let's talk about pointedly what is it that has exactly changed. Yes, people are now seeing more non-fiction than ever, but just like that has become more available, let's not at all turn a blind eye to the fact that it's also meant homogenizing in two specific ways: true crime and a certain kind of reality TV inflected non-fiction. Those are the two sort of main things. This is driving the, you know, this is causing a kind of industrial thrust, which has again made it tougher for a lot of personal, like a lot of the films that we are watching at this festival and really liking actually, I can imagine will have it tough because a lot of them are personal articulations, you know. Having said that, I would also not be being fair to the current moment in the sense that the difference between my first, which was a much smaller film called Cities of Sleep, and this film is massive. Back at that time, I had to be the the evangelist for the film and be very trigger happy with screenings and go from college to college, whoever would call us, right? So compared to that, the fact that the numbers of people who are watching the film on HBO are it's incomparable. So clearly something has also changed. It's also available on an OTT in India. So of course it's changed somewhat. But at best, I'm very guardedly optimistic in that it's like the kind of stuff that's burgeoning to visibility, to relevance, I have doubts about. So there's some things that I'm happier about, some things I have deep reservations about. But I'm not unproblematically euphoric about it at all.
Events like this where we are at, the films that we're watching now, we wouldn't have ever seen them anywhere. I don't know where. With So's, the first film, never found any distribution. Doordarshan refused to screen the film. And then the onus of it was on your shoulders. So we did a educational run. We went from university to university screening the film. I don't know what is the lot of this film that I've done. Yes, it has won accolades, but has it got distribution? Has it found its audiences? And I'm very, very willing, again, to do the same thing. Go from university to university, college to college, coastal community screenings. Because for me, essentially, films are about sitting together with a lot of people watching it and the discourse that happens afterwards. So this moment right now, for me, any day is more precious. OTT is reinforcing this very isolated lives that we are leading now. For me, entertainment was always about being with people. We watched films as family. We'd sit on a Sunday and, whatever Doordarshan was showing or or we went to a cinema. We're not doing any of that. OTT is definitely facilitating. Of course, it's providing audiences, but is there a discourse afterwards? We are not making our films in social isolation. We also want to engage. We want to know further. We want to know what moments what worked for you. And that 6 years of work that suddenly becomes very rewarding because a question comes. You never thought about it that way. And so I suppose it'd be great that if my film lands on an OTT platform, but just this moment right now where I'm sitting here and exchanging energy with so many people, to me this is priceless. And
this is to Sarvnik Kaur. You spoke that you are a fan of poetry. My question is, what is the parallels between poetry making and documentary making? And do you think that, as Wordsworth said, it is a spontaneous overflow of powerful shots? In filmatic terms, it is shots. Have do you endorse that parallel between the Wordsworthian poetic definition and that of a documentary maker? Another question to Shaunak Sen. As you are a documentary maker related with flora and fauna, especially birds or squirrels, etc. Here I am reminded of our Malayali singer Yeshudas, a Malayalam Hindi singer. He was in New York where in a US garden a squirrel was perching on his head. There was a Madhumi daily picture was there exhibiting that companionship. Do you think that there is sort of a quantum consciousness, a level of intimacy between you and the birds or honeybees or squirrels like that? Okay, what is your take on it?
you first want to go because I would like to think about it a little bit.
Well, I'm absolutely certain there is no intimacy between me and the birds. In that, but I don't mean this reductively. Okay, let me put it this way. I think very often non-human life or birds occupy a kind of their fringe tremors at the edges of our vision. what a film like this, I hope, does, at least it did for me because we spent so much time shooting it, is that suddenly the background of our lives, non-human lives, suddenly becomes bigger. So I spent 3 years basically just saying, "Kure, kure, kure, kure," like, or constantly pointing out non-human life. So if you spend 3 years constantly looking at snails or squirrels and so on, what it does do is that, I was very interested in this branch of thinking which is called the more than human philosophy, where the human is not seen as the absolute reference point, and you kind of disperse it into thinking of non-human entanglement. And that sort of thing is what I was, that perspective is what I was interested in. And not just in a kind of a highfalutin philosophical way, but as much in a actual way of being, and after a while, the thing is that it's not like some high theory. It just becomes genuinely interesting. You become genuinely interested in a kind, it's the thing that, let me put it this way. In a way, ornithology or bird watching and film watching are similar in that, or filmmaking is similar, especially documentaries, that it entails some kind of a deceleration. It entails some kind of a slowing down and a subtraction of yourself and just waiting. And hopefully over time that patience rewards you, right? It's true of bird watching, and it's true of a lot of documentary material gathering. So I suppose you get a bit more attuned to those things. But in terms of like some other kind of a synergy or intimacy with the birds, no. I think the birds remain completely agnostic to me, and I'm interested in them, in behavior and in finding moments of aesthetic beauty and looking at the city ecologically and so on, but nothing more than that. I wouldn't dial it up more than that.
For me, I think I was working, pretty much taking off from where Shaunak left. I was trying to find the magic in the real, and I just thought if I could empty myself off of all of my assumptions, and if I looked at things long enough, maybe a certain kind of truth and poetry and beauty will start to reflect off of it. So I become the first medium, and through me, it would outwardly flow. It's not to intellectualize the moment itself that is happening in front of you. It is to basically empty yourself off of all of those assumptions. Because to me, in the process of making this film, I realized my intelligence is a curse. It distances me from feeling a lot of things because I'm trying to make sense. The sense will emerge if I was just patient enough. And patience then for me became an act of writing poetry, an act of what this film now is.
I think, something that I found common in all your philosophies regarding filmmaking is about waiting for the right moment, or waiting for the magic to happen. Yeah, we have.
All three of you took years to complete your films, and you worked with multiple DOPs. In for Shaunak's films also there was two or three DOPs. Even for Sarvnik's films also there were 2 or more DOPs. So during the process, did you ever thought that it would have been good that you shot your film by yourself, because it's also intimate? But it's also become hassle when you work with DOPs, you have to.
No.
Well, I shot my first film myself, and till then I hubristically assumed that I could shoot. It didn't take long for that thing to get eroded. The thing is, with this film, we in this film, because we started with the assumption that we were not going to make a nature doc, and we were not going to make some of the usual kind of things that in the ways in which animals are shot. So I was interested in one specific person. It's somebody called Ben Bernhard, a German DP who shoots Victor Kosakowski's films. And effectively how it started was that I basically wrote him a cold mail, a kind of love letter, and said, look, would you consider working on this? And lo and behold, things panned out in a way that it worked out and he came. But then the pandemic came and he had to leave. So we had a very sort of um, pronounced style of these slow pans and these, languorous still downs and so on. And this was so much higher than my own pay grade as a DP that it would be absurd and grotesque for me to even consider it. So therefore, we had actually two other DPs, somebody called Somo Sahi and Riju Das, who came in. But here it was, otherwise there are like these, grammatical issues, or if there are different DPs. But essentially here, Ben had come and started with a very strong vocabulary. So we knew that this couldn't be a quick cut sort of. This wasn't a montage film, and we were just going on doing these slow movements. So that kind of necessitated a form. But having said that, the thing is that I'm certain I don't ever want to shoot something that I'm making after this, because in the first film I didn't realize this, and this was to the film's detriment, really. That very often you're then, when I'm thinking, like while the action is ongoing, I don't want to think about flexing my muscles as a DP or actually think about those things. I really want to hold on to the, when you're directing, essentially the point is to listen to the tiny voices in your head which are saying, maybe that. And it's basically you articulating those small, it's those small, tiny, minor notes in your head. And very often those get smothered by, those get silenced if you're constantly thinking about the mechanics of shooting. So I know that unless it's a very personal film, I wouldn't burden my, I want to keep something fresh and I want to keep an arm's length distance. And oddly enough, I used to think that what is the point of sitting on a separate chair and looking at a monitor? I actually now by the end of the film really prefer sitting and looking at the monitor and focusing. And there is something to be said, or something, some merit in this, in the quality of concentration or focus or just sitting and watching something. So I prefer that now onwards.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
No, I think I'm just going to echo that. Although I didn't have the luxury of having a monitor, but just knowing the moment that is unfolding in front of me and not having the impediment or constant pressure of converting that moment, I would bore my DPs to death. I would talk about the love in this moment. Look at this frame. We would come back and watch. We would roll the camera for 10 hours of the 12 hours that we were on location. And then it was a process of watching the footage over the next 10 days and going over, making notes, because it's telling you so much. What direction are you going? What should you be doing? And in that process, my DPs became very integral to what we were doing. They were very informed about what had happened, that whether they were there on the shoot or not, because over a period of 6 years, about 7 DPs came and went. Each one had to carry forward where the other one had left off, so that there was a consistency in the image making. And I think it was me sitting with them and boring them to death about, oh, look, do you see this moment that is happening right now? And getting them excited about it, getting them emotionally on the same page constantly. The relationship that I had with my characters, that relationship had to be translated and handed over also in a certain sense to them, because they've got this immense responsibility on their shoulders. They're wielding the camera. And each DP, when they left, had to do a handover. So there were hours of talking about it, constantly making assemblies and communicating where we are at, where are we going. So I'm glad actually that many DPs came, because in their questions, I also found myself and my film, where is it going? What's happening? Where do I want to go next?
Good afternoon. I have a question. When the question of camera comes in, so one idea struck in my mind that throughout the history of documentaries, there is a philosophical understanding of being authentic and being truth to the characters in terms of human documentaries, when the camera is present. So starting from the Kine Pravda movement to Jean Rouch and Edgar Morin, a lot of people are talking about that how a human character is getting conscious about the presence of the camera, and how their behavior changes or being manipulated, not being authentic due to the presence of the camera. But in recent times, after the technological movement, the sizes of the camera, the format of the media changed. As you mentioned, the opening film, there are a lot of footages which are shot in a hidden cameras, like a pen cameras. Sometimes, most of the times, the characters are not at all aware that the camera is being present or the camera is recording them. So considering the time being and the technological advancement, the way camera is becoming so much hidden, it's coming everyone's hands. So it is no more a big instrument, a big mechanism that like this is physically presence. So as a filmmaker, what do you think the future of the relationship between the camera as a mechanism to be present, or it is hidden? How the relationship is evolving, or where it will go regarding the changes of the size and the format of the media changes?
That's a very interesting question. Also very provocative. I think so. Quickly, in terms of the opening film, I think when you're seeing so much being recorded through hidden cameras, it's actually hidden cameras, but it's a very, very deep desire to be witnessed and recorded and to share it with the world. So this whole idea of wanting to be seen through the fact that your story that you think nobody may ever know, and the girl is about to be hanged, and she's spent 7 years in prison, and look at what's how the family has unraveled and everything that has come to them. Even though they are keeping the technology hidden, and that is not because of interpersonal relationships between them, it is because the state, like the state is the state is playing God in this situation. So it's almost like that very, very insistent desire to document and to be seen, and the word is witnessed actually, really, is what is dictating that. And I think in other cinematographical situations, it's I feel like it's really quite about what is the relationship that you want to develop. And again, it's you brought up that word truth. It is, oh my god, like it is if it is made to be a minefield, it truly is that minefield. And there is not enough that we can say or discuss or deliberate about whose truths are these. There is, of course, we know that there is no that one absolute voice of God truth, that any kind of film, forget about documentary fiction or any kind of representation, a photograph, at most it is a moment in time, at most it is a fact. Are fact truths? We don't know. Unto themselves, facts are not objective. There is nothing called objectivity. So it's really just about honing in on whatever is that idea of truth that you are working with in that present moment. To whom is that fidelity of that moment of recording? It's really, all of it is determined by it. I feel like technology kind of, I mean, it's never been like sort of the driver for me. I understand that people are, of course, we all have that moment, like Shaunak was saying, that of course in the first month we know that people are aware of the camera. We all are in on it, like it's a shared truth. And then we arrive at that point where people are okay with the camera. Are they ever unaware of the camera? I don't think. Do they ever stop performing? I don't think. But I'm pretty sure that they are performing versions of their own selves. And it's really like, what is that sense, what part of this person is it? I feel like even representation, it's, these kind of overdetermined terms are, often thrown at documentary especially. It's like, oh, this is the truth. Earlier it used to lie with the news. Like, oh, we've seen it on the news and therefore this is the truth. And we know how fractured all of these ideas are, how deeply subjective, and also very interesting and exciting for us to probe into. But it's really about like, what is that slice? Like, what is that slice of self of the person? What is that slice of truth in a particular moment? It's really just about harnessing that for me.
Just one small sort of addition to that. I would resist the because I know that it's a complex question, but I would resist the tendency to characterize film history as a kind of ongoing teleological procession of cameras becoming smaller and us marching towards a kind of closer access to truth. Because we know that that's not historically been true. I mean, we know that, of course, there are particular moments where camera technology and it getting unanchored from certain things, that encumbrances that tie it down, be it like bigger cameras or certain relationships to light and so on. So of course those have spawned particular moments, right? Like for instance, Italian neorealism came out of film emulsion becoming faster, therefore cameras could go outside. That meant other actors could be used, non-professional actors could be used, and that changed a certain kind of the politics of the story as well. Similarly with the French New Year, similarly with various different movements like this. Now of course there are moments where there is a kind of correlation between the industrial technology and a kind of political economy of the industry and the storytelling. But I don't think that we can think of a simplistic correlation between that and access to truth per se. Because, you know, these things, so for instance, just if we've through the 60s saw a certain kind of movement in the French New Wave, etc. But after that you have, you know, with the Russians, with Tarkovsky, etc., a very big, heavy camera, right? And that's accessing some different kind of truth. So, and I wouldn't even say that that's necessarily less democratic. And the question of democratizing isn't just about how accessible the camera itself is, especially when it comes to the question of truth. Let me, my favorite sort of theoretical explanation of this is, you know, for instance, when Frederick Wiseman is asked about truth, like he's a classic verite observational filmmaker. So his model is obviously the fly on the wall sort of approach. So he doesn't like that term himself, but it's the kind of invisible camera that is observing the world and the world sort of goes on, right? Conversely to that, somebody like Werner Herzog will say that don't be the fly on the wall, be the hornet that stings, right? Because his model is to, like, you know, like go and take something out and really provoke a sort of moment. But at the same time, there are many people who sort of in this big spectrum are wallowing at various places in the middle. I'm personally interested in this kind of sweet spot where characters are aware of the camera, but they arrive at a point of boredom towards it, where they know it, but they're sort of bored of it. And that kind of sweet spot in the middle is interesting because there is that awareness and a kind of, therefore, enactment. But at the same time, there is some kind of unself-consciousness. So, and I wouldn't say that one is a quicker highway to truth than the other. And yes, there are moments where unanchored or a more mobile camera has gotten great moments of intimacy, but not all correlation is causality. So I wouldn't have one kind of determining answer on this.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, our process was very entertaining actually. There are two fishermen in my film, and they both like to sit and drink almost every evening together. So when I met them for the first time, a year and a half was spent just drinking a lot of whiskey. And we would just set up the camera on the tripod. It was where I figured what my film was going to be. I was getting a spine of my film. Here they are arguing, debating, swearing never to talk to each other again, only to come back the next day together. They have irrevocable differences, and yet there's a friendship, and that friendship was found for me in my drunkenness. And so, you know, it need not be always that emerges from a place of boredom. It's also getting involved in an activity together. There can be very many ways of getting there. We'll just find our own path where, yeah.
And these differences add to the beauty of watching different people's perspectives and the different ways they express. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, and there is a film screening happening very soon here. But you know, I myself had more questions for you guys, and it was such an insightful and yeah, very live conversation. Thank you so much to each of you.